Rosemary essential oil has many uses, but since this video is a part of a series about focusing and getting stuff done, today I'm just going to be talking about how rosemary essential oil can improve your memory and your ability to think and manage your time. So what's coming up? I'm going to share a way that you can use rosemary essential oil easily in your home. Some history, of course, I'm going to do a history lesson if there is one. Some history about how rosemary the plant has been used and perceived over time in the past. And some recent studies about rosemary essential oil on rosemary, memory, and cognitive performance. There's a variety of techniques that you can employ when using essential oils for cognitive or a mood boost, but I'm just going to talk about one today. First of all, it is the easiest way, it's the fastest way, and it's also the way that rosemary essential oil was used in the studies that I'm going to talk about at the end of the video. So what that is diffusing. So you probably noticed my diffuser going behind me here, and all that I did is I filled up to a certain point inside the diffuser with water. And I added 2 drops rosemary, 2 drops wild orange, put it all back together, plugged it in, turned it on, and diffusing benefits anyone who's around in the room, so it's great for just helping anyone who's with you. But all you do is you just keep doing what you're doing and you reap rewards from breathing in the aromas of the essential oil. Rosemary and wild orange, like, it smells delicious. It's great and also very invigorating. It just makes me happy and alive. When you breathe in essential oils, there's an almost immediate interaction with the areas of the brain responsible for emotions, memory, stress response, and decision making. So these are areas like the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. So it doesn't have to be essential oils, but any aroma that you breathe in is changed into neural signals, which have a direct connection to the brain. The chemical constituents in the essential oils also end up being dispersed throughout the bloodstream as well. So I've also created another video called How Does Aroma Affect Our Emotions? That goes into a lot more detail of this process. So if you want to find out more about how essential oils interact with our brains, go check that video out. There are the prettiest, largest, fluffiest snowflakes falling outside this window. It's beautiful. Back to rosemary though, it's gorgeous. We haven't had a lot of snow this year yet. Rosemary's been associated with memory for a long time. So in ancient Greece, students wore garlands of rosemary or wove the rosemary into their hair during exams to help them recall their knowledge. And it was also common practice to sort of choose to medicinally eat rosemary or sleep with it under your pillow to help you to learn your lessons as well. I have a couple of books that are sort of early books written about herbal medicine that have quotations about rosemary as well. So the first one I have is The Herbal or General History of Plants, written by John Gerard in 1597. So this is what he had to say when it came to rosemary and the brain. The flower is especially good for infirmities of the head and brain. Rosemary dries the brain and quickens the senses and the memory. And another book that was written a little bit later on called The English Physician. A year later, the name was changed to The Complete Herbal. This book was written by Nicholas Culpeper in 1652, and he wrote, this about rosemary and the brain. When applied to the temples, reduced giddiness or swimmings of the brain, dullness of the mind, and reduced stupidness, loss of speech, lethargy, and falling sickness. There's also a couple of references to rosemary in Shakespearean plays as well. So in Hamlet, when Ophelia is losing her mind and she's walking into the court with like rambling and handing out flowers or pretend flowers to people, she says that there's rosemary, that's for remembrance. Now, rosemary has long been used in like a funeral. It's part of traditional funeral practices, and likely that's because of rosemary's association with having an improved memory. So by using rosemary around a funeral, that symbolizes that the deceased will not be forgotten. So it's an act of remembrance. And so they would put like the aromatic herb would be strewn over the body, which also helps, you know, honestly, with smell as well. And sprigs of rosemary would be carried in a funeral procession, thrown on top of a coffin for the burial as well. So you see this practice coming up in Romeo and Juliet, where Romeo is told after Juliet has died to dry up your tears and stick your rosemary on this fair corpse. So at this point you might be thinking, okay, come on, Julia. So they used rosemary for memory in ancient Greece and the 1500s, but they also did a lot of things that were not good in medicine. So is there anything to this? So I have 3 studies that I'm going to talk about now, and these are all been done fairly recently, and the conclusion is, yeah, there could very well be something to this sort of anecdotal connection that was made between rosemary and improved memory and like just better cognitive performance. The first study I'm going to talk about was done with children aged about 10 or 11 years old. They came into a room and they did a series of memory tests with a facilitator. The only difference is that the children were split into 2 groups, which was half the children went into a room with rosemary essential oil diffusing, and the other half went into a room with nothing diffusing. And there was actually a difference in the test scores. So the children who were doing their memory tests in the room with rosemary diffusing they did about 5 to 7% better than the children who were in the room who had no diffuser going. The second study involves adults, and all of the subjects in this study had rosemary essential oil diffusing in the room, where they carried out math problems using subtraction and some visual information processing tests where they had to pick out sequences of numbers in fast succession. So what changed in this experiment between person to person was the amount of exposure time to rosemary essential oil. So everyone waited 10 minutes before the tests began, but some of the subjects waited 10 minutes in the room where rosemary was diffusing, and then they started the test. Some people waited 10 minutes in a room or space where rosemary wasn't diffusing, and then they went to the room where the test would be happening with the rosemary and then did the test. And then everyone else in between was assigned sort of different ratios of time to spend between the 2 rooms during that 10-minute waiting period. So they had sort of a whole range of exposure time to rosemary essential oil. In each case, they made sure they turned on the diffuser in the test room 5 minutes before the person was scheduled to come into the room. So that was always the same between person to person. So after they did their tests, they drew blood for a blood test, and they measured the levels of a chemical compound called 1,8-cineol, which is found in high levels in rosemary essential oil. And so, of course, the longer that person spent with rosemary, the higher the blood levels of 1,8-cineol was, and there was actually a difference in the test scores. They actually found that there was a relationship between the levels of 1,8-cineol in the blood and how well the person did on the math tests. So they found the higher the level of this chemical constituent that comes from rosemary, the better the person did. And it affected both speed and accuracy as well. The third study was done with people who were 65 or older, and it studied the effects of rosemary and lavender essential oil on prospective memory. What prospective memory is remembering events that are going to happen in the future and remembering to do specific tasks at a certain time. So everyone was split between 3 groups. There was the room where nothing was diffusing at all. Then there was the room where lavender was diffusing, and then there was the room with rosemary diffusing. And so they did some prospective memory testing, and the subjects also filled out questionnaires about their mood kind of before and after the experiment happened. So the rosemary room had the best test results. So they scored the best on these prospective memory tests, and they did about 15% better than the control room where absolutely nothing was diffusing at all. The control room was sort of in the middle, and then the lavender room, test score wise anyway, was at the bottom. So they did really amazing though on their mood questionnaires though. So after they spent a whole bunch of time in the lavender room, they reported the most feelings of calmness and contentedness. So they felt the best. However, they did the worst on the memory testing, so they experienced a decreased ability from the people in the control room where nothing was diffusing at all. They had a decreased ability to remember to do something at a specific time. So they had the worst memory test scores, but they felt good. So keep this in mind. The next time you want to get some crap done, get your butt in gear, maybe you're just not feeling it, but you got something to do, or maybe you just really want to bang something out of the park, grab a bottle of rosemary essential oil, pop it in your diffuser, work away in the same space, and see what it does for you.